Hello and welcome to this episode of For Your Consideration. My name is Guy, and today we are looking at developing or designing an NPC villain based off of an image. Now, far too often I use images, or maybe not too often, I don't know. Often I use images that inspire me, or that I come up with a character and then I find an image and I go, but the image is much more interesting. The image gives me additional insight. And I think the reason for that is that, as they say, a picture paints 1,000 words, which means that there are 1,000 potential options for you in a single image for you to create a villain or a character, an NPC, out of, rather than trying to describe them first. To write 1,000 words on a single individual as a physical descriptor can be quite an interesting challenge. So let's use images rather to inspire us. And so that's exactly what we're going to look at. We're going to look at this image. Now, if you are a patron of the channel, you will already have been introduced to this individual. His name is Wakthroughs, and he is an undead orc. Now, we'll unpack all of that. Well, that is all unpacked for the Patreons. For the purposes of this video, however, we are simply going to be looking at, this heavily armored, undead, orc, dual axe wielding person. Now, already we have a physical descriptor starting to form. So we can say that he's tall, he's incredibly strong, he's cadaverous, his ribs have got skin stretched over them, but then the stomach area has completely withered away and collapsed underneath, creating this almost bone cage effect where his chest would normally have been covered in muscle. He's got incredibly thick neck muscles, very strong neck muscles, quite broad ears. He doesn't have any hair on his head. He wields 2 very large axes. He wears plate armor, and his lower half, certainly his upper half, you could just say the pauldrons are there, but depending on what mechanical system you're using, that might count as full armor, it might not. It's up to you to decide, of course. But the idea is that the image gives us the physical attributes. Now, that's easy enough. That's just a descriptor of what we're actually seeing. So who are we seeing here? We're seeing this figure. Where we start to draw inspiration from, at least certainly where I start to draw inspiration from, is I then look at the mental goals and drivers of this character. This is an undead orc who wields 2 axes, is heavily armed, so he obviously goes into combat. Is he mindless? I don't think so. I think the coordination required to wield 2 axes like that, the finesse that needs to be done, the coordination of swinging and chopping, of blocking and attacking, I think that requires a certain amount of mental capacity. I don't think he's a lich. Liches generally have lots of magic about them, and he might very well have magic about him, but I don't read that from this image. I get a sense that here is an intelligent predator who hunts his prey down, and he kills them as quickly as he possibly can. Hence the 2 axes, allowing him to make quick attacks, quick hacks, but he's not an idiot because he's got a second axe to defend himself or to make that killing blow as necessary. So I see this more as a focused predator. That means he's got thoughts going on in his head. There's a certain autonomy that has been granted to him by his creator. And that also requires explanation. There is an undead orc. That means someone made him an undead orc, which means that there needs to be that someone. So we're really getting this amazing story just out of this one image. So this undead hunter is designed to track down the enemy of the creator, we assume, or to protect the creator in some way, perhaps, and has the ability to think. What are they going to think about? Is there anything in this image, and I'm getting close up to have a look, is there anything in this image that could be of use? Now, there is, and you can't really see it here. I'm cheating because I made this image, so I know what this character has. But around his neck, there is a talisman. There is a clay tablet, a necklace of some kind. That necklace, I think, is our mental clue. If not, in another image, you might look for telltale signs. He does have a ring on. Again, I know it's not very clear in the background behind me, but he does have a ring on. Perhaps there's a ring connection there as well. The style of armor that he's wearing, the upper half is definitely very orc. The lower half is fairly generic human plate mail armor, I would say. So if he is hunting and he's got these thoughts going through his head, we could just make him the ultimate predator. He focuses on his target and off he goes. That's fine if we weren't making a villain. If we were making just a henchman and he's just enacting and following orders, then that would be absolutely fine. But he's a villain, so he's got to have goals and ambitions so that we can create that sentence, right? That ultimate sentence. So with this necklace, this tablet around his neck, or with the ring, I think that talks back to when he was alive. What happened when he was alive that transformed him from being alive into this undead creature? What or who made him and why? That for me is what is important. So it's about exploring what the image gives you and then trying to make a narrative out of it. I generally don't try and force a narrative onto an image. I rather draw from the image. That way, when I share the image with my players, they can see it and then they get an immediate response based on the information that I'm giving them. So any clues that I might give my players about the character immediately triggers a reaction in their heads. And I hate it specifically when a handout is given, oh, that's a picture of what the guy kind of looks like, but instead of the big spiky horn-based pauldron, imagine a nice soft leather one, and instead of axes, he's using swords, and his upper half, he's actually got this big helmet on. Then the image that you're supplying me has no value. If, however, you have based the character off of the image as completely as you possibly can, now the image has a double reinforcement. A, it's an image, so there's that visual stimulus, but also every time we encounter a specific thing that we can see on that picture, we build a stronger connection. So that's what I usually try and do. So that ring, let's say that ring was his wife's ring, and it has particular meaning to him. So he remembers the time with his wife. Then he was killed. He was an orc, so arguably he was killed in combat. Maybe, though, he wasn't. Maybe he was killed whilst in the arms of his wife. He was murdered or poisoned. Maybe he was poisoned by his wife. Now that starts to lead my little brain on a certain course of action. If he was poisoned by his wife and then raised as an undead by his wife, that creates a very interesting story, because what if she raised him as her pet, as her plaything, but the love between them that had originally formed was too strong, so she couldn't stand just seeing this corpse mope around the castle, so she gave him intelligence, and what did he do? He turned around and he killed her. He destroyed her, because she had murdered him and she had given him this undeath space, which meant that when she touched him, he didn't feel the warmth of her fingertips. He didn't feel anything. He couldn't feel her breath on his skin anymore. He couldn't breathe in her perfume. He couldn't smell her perfume, depending on how undead work in your world. But I'm extrapolating here. He killed her. And then he realized what he had done. Or perhaps he couldn't feel what he had done. He no longer has emotions. So he took that ring and he now wears that ring of his wife upon his hand. And so he will show mercy to people who have been betrayed by their lovers, or who are lovers, perhaps. Or he will be particularly vindictive against female victims. Or he will be particularly vindictive against individuals who comment on the feminine ring that he wears. But that's his headspace, a betrayed individual who doesn't trust anyone and who can't feel anything. Now we have his headspace. Now we can expand into how do we express that to our players? How do we now translate what's going on in his head to our players? I think it's very simple. I think we can go with the traditional sort of story trope that when he comes across a female, he takes her back to his lair or his encampment or wherever it might be, and he tests to see whether she is of the same level of skill as his mate used to be. So he puts them through physical trials, and then perhaps he puts them into mental trials, and if they pass both of them, he will then offer his hand in marriage to that individual, to almost seek absolution for the murder that he committed. That's a pretty interesting story to run on there, especially if you've got female characters within your playing group. If not, he abducts a female NPC from the village to do exactly the same thing with. It gives them a drive, it gives them a motivation. Of course, when that female does not live up to their expectations, they then just kill them and toss them aside as being useless and waste of their time. So we can express those mental issues in a myriad of ways, and it's up to you, of course, based on the mental condition that you are describing, that you're talking about, as to how that gets expressed. But it creates such a vivid, wonderful moment, doesn't it? Especially when the players come across, or the characters anyway, come across this creature, this half-orc, and he has a dead woman in his arms, and he is remorseful, and tosses her to the ground and says, "She is not the one." And then he turns and leaves. Or he is hunting down a specific NPC female that looks like his wife used to look. Because of that, he wants her back. That's the traditional sort of Hollywood narrative, if you like. And it works for a reason. In his case, it's quite a macabre reason. He's trying to recreate his wife. So we express the mental agitation within by looking at the image and by drawing inspiration from the image. And hopefully the image is complex enough that it gives you some clues or some hints. We then need to look at the scenarios, the adventures that can come out of a creature like this. So we've already described a multitude. He hunts down a specific woman that he feels will be his bride. He hunts down specific he has captured someone already and is putting them through trials. He places the PC character through trials. You can see the adventure options just exploding out there. Maybe he's in physical combat with the party, then he withdraws and they discover that he has no interest in the party because they're all men. So he leaves them alone for a while, and then a couple of adventures later they come across him again when he's abducting these women. Of course, you can change it on its head and that he's trying to abduct men because maybe it wasn't his wife that betrayed him, it was his husband. Whatever setting you want to go with, it doesn't matter. The idea behind it is that you link it back to the object or to the image itself. So the scenarios speak for themselves once you start to get the mental state of the character based on the image. We then need to look at the gear and what the PCs stand to get when looting a body. Now, this is something that I particularly hate in computer games, for example, where you have a character who's got this amazing wardrobe, you kill them, and then all you can loot off of them is a cracked stick or 3 gold pieces. What about the clothing that they're wearing? When you supply an image like this, you are also supplying to those types of players a inventory, basically, of what they can loot. They can certainly loot those wonderful axes, and we need to come up with a story about those axes. Are they magical? Do they have a specific meaning? They're very dark. They don't particularly look orcish to me, so they've obviously been brought from somebody else, given as a gift, stolen, taken off of a corpse, you name it. They've got to have some kind of origin story. So you can jot down the origin story of those axes. The lower half armor doesn't really seem to match up with the upper half. The lower half doesn't have any spikes or horns on it, unlike the upper half. So what's that? Is that somebody else's armor? It looks like he's wearing a metal kilt, as a matter of fact. That's pretty cool. So where does that come from? What's the origin of that? Are those boots magical or not? Then the pauldrons that he's wearing, the one with the 3 tusks or teeth that are sticking out of them, what are those teeth? What beasts do those come from? Did he slay them and put them in there, or was that already part of the original design? So that's something to look at. His gauntlet, or no, not his gauntlet, his wrist guard, for example. Brain's gone to mush, cannot remember the name. Anyway, has got these Wolverine-like spikes on the one side. The other side doesn't seem to have it. Again, this is going off of the image. So those 3 spikes, again, are they there for design? Are they aesthetic? Do they have poison in them that can be added as he squeezes his wrist? It causes poison to ooze down those claws. So when he goes into combat, he loses his axes. He now goes to poison because he needs to survive so that he can carry on with his mission to find his wife. Those sort of things. Again, once you've got the mental state, all of the rest of the gear starts to center around that. And that's very important for me anyway, is to get into that space. So we look at the gear and then we look at the implications of that gear. When the character is defeated by the players, and we have to assume that the players' PCs will defeat this character if we're setting them up against him, what are the implications of those devices? They can't just melt, they can't turn to dust. The PCs are going to pick them up and they're going to have ramifications. You need to keep this in mind. An awesome image with a character who's got all this really cool stuff on it, if it converts through to cache, is this something that's going to have value for the PCs, and is that value going to imbalance the game or not? That's the risk you run with using an image, by the way, is that when you're just using a descriptor, when you're using something that's in your head, you describe them as fairly shabby plainmail. I wouldn't describe the guy behind me as wearing fairly shabby plainmail. This is good quality stuff by all intents and purposes. So your players are going to expect that equality of image to game translation must be there. Now, once I have got this image of this orc, this undead orc with this tragic past, so I can now feed that information to my players. They go to an inn, they hear a rumor about this undead orc who used to be the blacksmith, but his wife betrayed him. All those kinds of wonderful things. You can feed all of that to your players. So once you've got all of that down, then you can go through the statting phase and go, all right, well, if I'm using Dungeons and Dragons, maybe he's got a strength of 17 or 18, a dexterity, or maybe a 15, a constitution, he's undead. His intelligence, he looks pretty sharp to me. He doesn't look like a dumb one. So we'll put his intelligence slightly at, say, 13 or so. Wisdom, he's undead, so he's obviously experienced a lot. Let's leave that at 10. Charisma, he's not particularly ugly. I mean, he is undead, so depending on your personal taste, let's say he's quite gruff. He doesn't handle women very well. That could be quite a nice curse, as a matter of fact. He's trying to find this wife. He's trying to find this soulmate of his, but he himself is absolutely repulsive. So let's give him an 8 charisma. So he's not very pretty. That's not really what we're talking about. He's gruff, and he's rough, and he is crude, and he has no consideration for others or how others feel. So that's then this holistic picture that is then forged out of a single image. Single image behind me. I'm all swapped around. But the single image. And how easy is it? And how quick was it to create in a... Oh, God. All right. 17-minute video. I'm sorry. In 17 minutes, we have unpacked this remarkable character and explored this very interesting space of creating a nemesis out of nothing. Now we can sit back and say, right, apply the sentence. This character, Wakthroughs, what does he want? He wants a bride. So how is he going to get that bride? Where is he going to get his bride from? And why is he having difficulty getting it? There's our sentence. Players, PCs, engage, adventure done. All from a single image. I hope this has been inspirational. I hope it's given you some ideas as to go and take a picture, any picture you like, or to make your own if you're a budding artist, as we have so many on the channel, and extrapolate and see where it takes you, see where it goes. And until next time, I wish you a fantastic weekend. If you haven't headed on over to worldanvil.com, head on over there, as they have templates for creating characters, much like the one behind me. As a matter of fact, I used worldanvil.com to create the particular character behind me for the Patreons. It's got templates and it discusses things and it unpacks things, and of course I'm now doing videos for them on just how to do that, so maybe that will help and inspire you even further. Otherwise, head on over to www.greatgamemasters.com, where you can have a link through to Amazon and you can buy all sorts of cool stuff for the weekend, because you just never know when you might need a second DM screen. You know what I'm saying? Anyway, until next time, I wish you and yours the happiest of gaming.